Hi, I'm Patrick Phelps. Welcome to Mining Matters. As you've probably noticed, spring is springing and winter is behind us. Winter's the coldest, darkest time of the year, as you probably know, and it's through these months that our electricity, sourced largely from renewables but also fossil fuels like natural gas and coal. It's this electricity supply that keeps our houses warm and our lights on. In a household, electricity is mainly used for heating water, powering electrical devices, keeping food cold, keeping people warm, lighting, cooking, and for drying clothes. Demand fluctuates throughout the day. A lot's used when we wake up, turn the lights on, take the chill off, have a hot drink, make some breakfast, maybe have a shower. Then it's pretty consistent throughout the day, but there is another spike in demand. A fair bit's used when people come home from work, cook dinner, take the chill off, watch whatever people watch, and maybe have a shower. It's these times of extra demand when the grid is under a considerable amount of pressure that fossil fuels like coal and gas get used most. This is typically called peak load, which basically means natural gas and coal used to meet increased demand with increased supply. Household demand for electricity is also much greater than winter than it is in summer, which is not surprising. I mean, there's increased demand for light and for heating. But unfortunately, at that time of the year in winter, the inflows into our rivers and lakes are lower, so the output from hydro schemes is lower. Things like, say, hydro, geothermal and wind, well, their supply just is what it is. Demand goes up and down, but the output from those renewables can't just magically go up and down. The only way at the moment that we can really increase electricity supply at our discretion is to increase the amount of natural gas and coal we're burning to generate electricity, and then if we don't need it, we can dial that back. Having said that, New Zealand's still got fairly renewable electricity. After Costa Rica and Iceland, which both have about 99% renewable electricity, and then Norway at 95%, New Zealand's got the fourth highest percentage of renewable electricity in the OECD, or Rich Democracies Club, with about 81%. Throughout winter, when we were burning, more natural gas and coal, there were comments from people from Forest and Bird and Greenpeace that we haven't built enough renewable electricity generation over the last couple of decades. This depends entirely on a person's definition of enough, but arguably I think we've actually done okay. While there's been no notable increase in hydroelectricity generation since the early 1990s, since the mid-2000s I'd say, our generation from geothermal electricity and wind has increased, and our generation from natural gas, I'm talking long-term trends here, not year-by-year fluctuations, our long-term trend for generation from natural gas and coal since 2005 has been falling. In fact, across the country we've sourced more electricity from our wind farms than we have from coal-fired electricity generation over the last 5 or 6 years, but if I had to take a pick, looking at what's been happening lately, I'd say that coal's going to outstrip wind at least in the next year or two. Just quickly, it's worth taking a look at our population. In the last 30 years, or since 1990, the number of people living in New Zealand has increased by about 42-43%. Emissions from electricity have grown in overall or absolute terms, but really they've just fallen on a per capita basis over the past 30 years. Compare that to the elephants on the highway and the runway. The growth in transport emissions, both domestically and internationally, has grown significantly, outstripping population growth. If you were to use 2019 as a snapshot, New Zealand's transport emissions were almost 4 times greater than our electricity emissions. I've heard a few things through the winter along the lines of,
New Zealand is likely to import more coal this year than it ever has before.
This has been coupled with statements like,
coal is the most carbon-emitting fossil fuel in the world.
This is true. For every unit of electricity that's generated, coal emits more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than any other fossil fuel. And globally, coal is the largest source of CO2 emissions. But not in New Zealand, where actually coal is a relatively small contributor to emissions compared to other fossil fuels like oil and natural gas. And while coal imports have been on the rise, which I will look at another time because that's worth a video of its own, While coal imports have been on the rise, the electricity sector's use of coal as a fuel is trending down-ish, but it's pretty volatile year on year. For example, in 2005, which is one of the highest years, coal generated about 13% of New Zealand's electricity. In 2016 it only generated about 2%, but then last year in 2020 it generated about 5% of our electricity. So it moves up and down quite a bit. Growth in geothermal and wind generation, along with flatter demand and relatively benign hydrological conditions, reduced the demand for coal and natural gas in the electricity sector through the 2010s, but it was never eliminated. While Huntly provides some baseload through its use of natural gas and coal, it's that peak load capacity that's really important for New Zealand in terms of keeping the lights on, to use that cliche. It's very hard for renewable sources, other than a little bit of hydro storage, to meet the difference between the constant but varied output from renewables and the fluctuating demand for electricity users throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year. Like I say, while some water can be stored in dams and then released when it's needed, that's fairly limited in New Zealand compared to, say, Norway. In most other sectors, coal use has been pretty stable since 1990, but that volatility of demand for coal in the electricity sector is really testament to just how hard it is to rely on renewables all the time when that demand is always going to be coming up and down from consumers. The demand for coal was so low about 2015-16 in the electricity sector that Genesis basically said it was going to shut down its coal capacity at Huntly Power Plant. But there were others in the electricity sector who said that if Genesis did that, it would put the supply of electricity for New Zealand at risk, and they asked them to stay open. And then since then, Genesis has made commitments over the years to stop using coal by a certain date, but they've never really followed through on that, and particularly that will be a difficult commitment to uphold now that the supply of gas for New Zealand is such an uncertainty in the coming decades. Now, with the abundance of wisdom and virtue that Forest and Bird so proudly possesses, the organisation's prescribed solution is to simply shut down Huntly Power Plant so New Zealand can't continue to burn coal or natural gas in the electricity sector. At least that's the impression I got when I heard the organisation's chief executive Kevin Haig talking to Heather du Plessis-Allen on News Talk ZB, albeit prior to those rather unpopular power cuts.
We just have to stop burning coal. That is
like today.
That's a hard limit.
Do we do it today, Kevin?
I reckon we should. If it were up to me, I would close Huntly.
Forest and Bird would have a bit more credibility on this topic if they weren't so enthusiastically opposed to just about any hydroelectricity development when it's got a proven record as New Zealand's largest source of renewable electricity. Even if New Zealand's electricity system was to get to 95% renewable or higher, without coal or natural gas, the country would be on a knife's edge in terms of security of supply. Genesis Energy estimates without Huntly, the country would need about 140 Tesla Powerwall batteries per household to bridge the gap. That would come at a cost of about $2 million per dwelling. Coal's a relatively small but vital part of the electricity sector. It gives us a flexibility, as does natural gas, but it gives us a flexibility that we just can't get from relatively inflexible supply or generation from renewables. With gas supply falling, with exploration for gas effectively banned, coal, imported or otherwise, is going to be needed to keep our supply of electricity stable as we build more renewables and probably eventually get to 100% renewable electricity. But we can't just ban coal or shut down power plants that run on it unless we want to live with power cuts. Imports are a subject for another video, which I am going to do, but security of supply is not something you want to mess with unless you're happy for your heat pump or light bulbs or oven to be decommissioned from time to time or frequently when renewables can't quite cut it. Anyway, thanks for watching.